Today we visit with new Kerrville City Manager, Dalton Rice.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Welcome back for another episode. And I'm absolutely thrilled today for two reasons. First, our guest is Dalton Rice, new city manager of the city of Kerrville. But I'm equally thrilled that Andrew Gay, my co-founding partner of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network, is joining me. So, gentlemen, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Dalton, can I maybe start out with a basic question of, could you explain to our audience what a city manager system is in the state of Texas?
Basic question in city manager. Ooh, that's going to be a tough one. Long story less long, a city manager is basically a chief executive officer for a city. So everything, all the departments under a city, ideally, would fall under the purview of the city manager, who's appointed by a city council, who is the elected body, or similar to a board of directors.
And that is opposed to a mayoral system, how is that a little bit different?
Very different. So you have mayor strong forms of government where a mayor is elected as kind of the CEO. A lot of cities are getting away from that. Houston is one, Texas City is another, but a lot of cities are really going to the city manager, or at the city manager, council manager form of government is what we call it.
So could you tell us a little bit about your professional background?
Yeah, my professional background kind of spans all over the place. After high school, I did some volunteer time with the local fire department in the Houston area, grew up in the Houston area, and left for the military. Did almost 14 years in the military. I was an infantryman for a little bit, and then went into special forces as a Green Beret. Was a medic with them for a while. Joined the Guard kind of shortly after I got out in 2012. Did firefighter and paramedic, and kind of dove into that for about 6 years on the east side of Houston. Some pretty busy areas. Then loved it, but kind of thought that I needed a change. Worked on my degrees, both my undergrad and my grad. Jumped into the private sector, into healthcare administration, doing process and performance improvement, doing a lot of cleanup work for the private sector and public sectors. And then kind of accidentally fell into public administration. Started off as a management analyst, which is, they call it an assistant to the city manager. It's the bottom of the totem pole in the city manager's office. Did that for a couple of years and said, you know what, let's take the leap. Started applying for some city manager jobs and made it out to Morgan's Point Resort in Central Texas, about 2.5 years. And then very fortunate to come out here to be Kerrville's next city manager.
This morning, I had the opportunity to interview a retired Marine Corps officer, and I'd ask him a couple of leadership lessons that he got from the Marine Corps that he's able to take into the civilian world. So let me ask you, as a Green Beret and an infantryman, are there any leadership lessons that you were able to take that you can utilize literally to this day?
Absolutely. I think that's a whole podcast in and of itself. From the military side, and I love talking about the leadership component of things. And especially in the special forces side, a lot of it's diplomacy. When you look at the traditional unconventional warfare mindset that a lot of special operations goes into, we don't have the resources. So we have to go into communities, overseas, very austere environments, and we have to build relationships. So everything was about relationships. The leadership component, you got to work with your peers, and you had to learn how to not only be autonomous, but also adaptable, and, a lot of attributes that come in. Outside in the military, and I'd say probably the most challenging aspect, and something I love, a whole nother podcast, is coming out of the military, going from that very type A mentality, very driven, high performing, high energy teams, into managing everyday people. And that was a big learning curve for me, because my 100% is not everybody else's 100%. So I had to really learn how to adapt that. I learned more about the leadership kind of in my transformation of domestication and being a dad than I ever did in the military. Raising twin boys gave me more leadership experience than I ever learned from the military.
One of the other things he said was when he was in the Corps, you did not have a day off. You were a Marine 365 days a year. And it strikes me that the city manager of a town the size of Kerrville may be similar to that. Everybody knows you. We've had bank presidents and principals talk about going to the grocery store and people talking to them for 20 or 30 minutes. Is that part of your experience as a city manager? Everyone knows who you are?
Yes and no. And you know what? I love it. The comparison from the military being, 24/7, 365 compared to a city manager 24/7, 365. The military life is easy. You're told what to do, where to go, how to do it, and it didn't matter whether you were an officer or enlisted. The hardest thing about the military really was on the families. We chose it, we loved it, we wanted to do it. The families didn't necessarily choose it. And I always kind of attribute the city manager moving and being a nomad. Every community I went to in the military, I'm going there because it's a job. The base is there and that's where it's located, and we fit in. City manager, you get to choose the community that you want to be a part of. And so it's not a job, it's a lifestyle. Yeah, there are times where, my wife and I do date night every week, at least once a week. We make it a habit. If we don't want to really, interact per se, we'll go to other communities. We'll go out, or we'll fly out and go somewhere and travel somewhere else, for a couple nights, or drive somewhere. But outside of that, she loves it and hates it. But yeah, we go to restaurants and we meet people, and I'll talk to them for 10 or 15, 20 minutes, but it's not work. It's our community. It's really, truly, as cliche as it sounds, it's what we believe in and why we're doing it. And so I love that aspect of it. You have to find that balance.
Andrew?
I want to talk about everybody's favorite topic when we're talking about the city, which is economic growth. So, but I want to talk about it through the lens of the city manager, and as far as what tools do you have in your toolbox that you envision using to help foster some of that here? I know that we all know that the trick is the right kind of growth, right? But how do you see that playing out as far as, because we also know that we don't have control of the old joke here in Kerrville is that the city does things that control what private businesses and their decisions do as far as inside the city. And we know that that's not true, but as a city manager, what tools do you have available to try to help aid some of that?
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to minimize some of the smoke and mirrors, because unfortunately, everything we do, there's political impacts, and I'm politically agnostic, and I have to be. I have to maintain that neutrality. I call it the umbrella effect. Ultimately, my role as city manager is to navigate, let the teams hire the right people, put them in place, and let them do their jobs. And we have an amazing team. Then you have the political side going up. So how do we kind of navigate that to minimize some of, the ups and downs? So really how I kind of attribute it and how we navigate that is there's going to be times of development and then times of redevelopment, but then you have sustainability. So how do we make sure that we don't focus too much on our future where we're neglecting the past, but we don't drag our successes in the rear and we continue to maintain that, that sustainability. And that's one of the things that kind of drove us to Kerrville was there's at least a plan. Now, how we execute that can always be up for interpretation. But bottom line is, as a city manager, especially, and what we talk to the community about, what's the good, the bad, and the ugly? And that's all we can do. We provide the good, the bad, and the ugly. We try to have the greatest positive impact on the most amount of people while minimizing the negative impact on the least amount of people. And that's going to change.
So one of the things we talked about that the other thing I wanted to ask you about, we discussed a little bit about this before we got started here, but is the importance of an open dialogue or a channel of communication between the city residents and the city manager themselves. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we have a great management team, with Kim Eismer, assistant city manager, Michael Horness, assistant city manager, Michael Hayes, city attorney. And everybody, I actually have to give Maya Johnson probably the most amount of credit. She's been putting up with my calendar for the last month, and it drives her crazy just looking at it. But we have such a great management team that it really is kind of allowing me to get out in the community and be the face, and not necessarily a positive face, but also be able to take the lashings. Our team shouldn't have to do that. And it's not always about the lashings. It's about communicating. It's about getting out there and talking with the residents, give them an ear. Sometimes it's just about venting, but it also helps us get a pulse on some of the things that we may need to improve on. It allows me to advise our city council, in our community on, maybe things that we need to pivot or change. Our 2050 plan in 2018, a lot of the demographics and the data has shifted already. And so, how do we make sure we keep those up to date so we're giving our community the right information and the right answers? We have such a great story to tell. Everybody's doing amazing things. Now we just need to tell that story and continue to tell that story.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about, Dalton, was your perspective on the uniqueness of our area in Kerrville in particular. So, I know that, we have 5 different sources of where we get our water from. We have a higher park per person ratio, I think, than some other places comparatively here in Texas. So maybe just from your perspective, being here thus far, what's your take on some of that, and maybe some of those things that may stand out to you as far as what makes this area unique?
That's a good question. I mean, and it's kind of, there's a bunch of different ways you can look at it. Let's pick it apart. So quality of life projects, right? Quality of life are going to be your parks, your, some of your downtown stuff. There's a lot of things that you don't really have a true monetary return, or ROI or something, but they bring something to the community, give kids a place to go to, walkability, wellness, mental health. There's a lot of things that are hard to put an actual metric or number on. Then you have the other side, the enterprise side, and it's not about making money, but we have a service, we have a product, we have to provide water. And how do we do that? We're very different than a lot of cities in that we do have 5 sources of water, and, everybody's going through the same challenges that we are. And so we have to be able to tell that story to our community, to let them know by us having these plans and by us continuing to reevaluate what these look like, we are constantly making sure that we're staying ahead of the game and not doing what some other cities are doing, where they're being reactive the entire time versus a more proactive approach. And so that's one thing I love about Kerrville, is we are taking that proactive approach. We just need to continue to tell that story.
Tom?
Sure. There are multiple governmental units in Kerrville and Kerr County that I assume you interact with on a regular basis. And I want to start with education. Last week, I had the privilege to guest host the lead on Leadership Week, and we spent one day with the Dr. Brent Ringo from the Kerrville ISD, Dr. Robert Templeton from Ingram ISD, and Dr. Charlie McCormick from Schreiner University, recognizing that those are Schreiner, of course, is private, but the other two are public bodies. Does the city have the opportunity to interact with the educators in this town? Because although development is certainly a part of our future, our children are, and educating them. Is there any, is that something you work with, or the city works with, I should say?
I'm going to say yes. And whatever we can do to take it to the next level, over the next, I'd say the previous or past month and the next kind of 60 days, that's all it's been, is meeting a lot of internal and external stakeholders. I've toured Schreiner University, with Dr. McCormick, and Dr. Ringo and I've, chatted quite a bit, and really meeting a lot of the general managers, executive directors, from the chamber to the EDC. We've already had tons of interaction with these folks, and it's always been there. The relationship has always been good. It's now, how do we take it to the next level? How do we work together? Going back to the academic side, how do we work and partner with them to start trying to build our future workforce, our succession planning? How do we get our kids, the ability to have some technical skills that we could potentially get them, into local government? And what does that mean? So yeah, absolutely. There's definitely room for that. And we've already kind of started that in less than a month. And I know it's been ongoing before me as well.
Kerr County also has a governmental body, Commissioner's Court. Could you explain the relationship between the city of Kerrville as a governmental unit and Kerr County as a governmental unit?
Yeah, every governmental entity is always going to have, ups and downs, different styles of government, how things are run, elected bodies versus appointed bodies. And no city and county relationship is ever going to be, perfect. And I've had a fortunate opportunity to meet with, the judge and all the commissioners, and, and hey, I'm not a guy of circumstance. I really don't give a crap what happened, previous time. I'm not a he said, she said guy. Hey, let's cut through it. How can we work together to start building our future? How do we work together to make sure we provide the services, to our community? And to me, that's how I look at it.
You mentioned multiple stakeholders. As part of Leadership Week, we had CEOs of local businesses, and they talked about what they viewed as their civic duty as leaders of business. Do you also interact with the business community?
Absolutely. And with, our Kerr Economic Development Corporation, our EIC, we have a lot of folks that are already, kind of in that realm. I sit on the Kerr Economic Development Corporation board, and even beyond that, just meeting with our local communities, going and having dinner in their facility, restaurants, or going to their establishments. In a very short time, I've been very fortunate to meet a lot of, great folks, and everybody loves their community in their own way. And so how do we take all that information and find out, what works and how can the city help accomplish our goals and their goals as well.
There's a vibrant nonprofit community in this city as well. Arts, rescue animals, mental health, physical health, just any number of nonprofits. Does the city interact with the nonprofit groups?
Absolutely. Anybody and everybody who I think has a heart and plays a role in Kerrville, Kerr County, and everything we do, I think the answer is yes. And if we aren't, call me, reach out to me, and let's talk and figure out how we can support each other. I mean, look at the Chalk Festival, look at Arcadia, look at all these different events. I mean, 2 weeks ago, my days are running together, but Kerrville was designated the 50th music friendly city. That's incredible. I mean, that's unbelievable. And so I think that's a testament to everybody really working well together, and I'm filling those big shoes. We're going to continue to do that and expand it however we can.
I think you've been here about 3 months. Is that right?
Yeah. Got here October 2nd.
Okay. So less than 3 months.
Yeah.
Could you give us maybe some initial impressions?
Really the initial impressions I think are exactly what we're talking about. And I'm either going to hit the nail on the head or I'm going to be way off, but no, the interview process was great. The council and the team, Kerrville team, were amazing. Wife and I got to really travel here and kind of see everything, again during that time. And I got to spend about a day or two in September in transition, finding a place to live and schools. And I got to spend a couple days here and there. And that kind of, I think, solidified what I had already thought. And over the past month, it's really exceeded my expectations as far as, what's happening, where we're going, and the great things that are happening across the community.
Any more?
Yeah, one last one. If I'm a city resident, what would be your suggestion thus far in your take on what I could do to either get involved or help support the city's efforts as far as what's going on there? Is it go to all the city council meetings and voice my opinion? Is it hands off, leave y'all alone, let you do your thing? What would be something in the middle? What would be your suggestion?
There's a lot of ways you can get involved, whether that's, volunteering for boards, coming out to events, doing anything. I think regardless of how you get involved in any community and really any situation, ask questions. Ask questions. Don't always take to the point of just let us do our stuff. No, ask questions. The world is filled with misinformation, and as much information that gets out there as quickly as it can, the biggest thing we can do is just ask questions. And sometimes the answer is hard, sometimes the answer is easy, and then sometimes the execution of that is even worse. So I'd say however you get involved, ask questions. And if you have any questions on how to do that, come up to City Hall and talk to us, send us an email and we can put you in the right place.
Dalton, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but before we leave, if our listeners wanted any more information on the city of Kerrville, what would be the best place for them to go?
You can go to the city website. We're on social medias, and those are experts way above my pay grade. But, social media, City of Kerrville website, you can come up to City Hall. If you see somebody in a City of Kerrville vehicle, ask them. If you have a question, ask the public works folks, ask, our parks and rec folks. They are more of the face of the community than I ever could be, and they love their community in their own way. So yeah, ask any city employee and they're going to point you in the right direction.
Well, Dalton, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with us. I hope we can continue this conversation.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you all for having me.
This is Tom Fox again. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review wherever great podcasts are listened to. The award-winning Texas Hill Country Podcast is a production of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.